I'm going to tell you something that most people refuse to accept about money. It is not a resource you manage. It is a consequence of decisions you already made. The moment you think you are controlling money, you have already lost control of the system that generates it or wastes it. This is not about budgets. This is not about discipline. This is about the architecture of choice, and most people build that architecture backward. I spent decades watching companies burn through cash. I watched individuals do the same. The pattern is identical. They believe they are making financial decisions when in fact they are making identity decisions, priority decisions, and fear decisions that happen to involve money. The money is just the scoreboard. But they stare at the scoreboard and wonder why the game is not changing. They adjust the numbers, they cut costs, they renegotiate, they optimize. And 6 months later they are back in the same position. Sometimes worse because they never touched the system that produced the problem. You want to save money? Fine. But saving money is not the goal. Saving money is what happens when you stop doing the things that waste it. And those things are not what you think they are. You think waste is buying too much, spending on the wrong items, failing to track expenses. That is surface waste. That is the exhaust. I am talking about the engine. The engine is how you decide what matters. And most people have never built a functioning decision engine. They have a reaction system, they have a justification system, they have a compromise system. But they do not have a framework that separates what must happen from what should not. Let me be clear. I am not talking about being cheap. I am not talking about deprivation. I am not talking about cutting everything until life becomes small and joyless. I am talking about the opposite. I am talking about clarity so sharp that waste becomes impossible because you see it the moment it tries to enter your life. You do not fight it. You do not resist it. You just do not let it through the door because the door is built correctly. Here is what people believe. They believe that saving money is about controlling spending. They think the problem is impulse or lack of willpower or not having a strict enough budget. So they create rules. They set limits. They track every dollar. They feel virtuous when they stay under budget and guilty when they go over. This approach makes sense. It feels responsible. It is what financial advisors teach. It is what parents tell their children. It is common wisdom. And it is completely wrong. I will tell you why. Controlling spending assumes the problem is execution. It assumes you know what you should spend money on and what you should not, and the only issue is following through. But that assumption does not hold. Most people do not know what they should spend money on. They have never defined it. They have never built a framework. So they are trying to control something they have not even identified. They are managing symptoms without diagnosing the disease. I saw this at Apple when I returned in 1997. The company was dying. Everyone knew it. And the first instinct was to cut costs, cut marketing, cut research, cut staff, cut everything. That is what companies do when they panic. They try to control spending. But I looked at what Apple was actually doing, and the problem was not that we were spending too much. The problem was that we were spending on 70 different product lines, most of which made no sense, served no clear purpose, and confused everyone including ourselves. We had printers, we had servers, we had 6 different versions of the Macintosh that nobody could explain. The cost was not the issue. The incoherence was the issue. You cannot save money by controlling spending when you do not know what you are spending for. You can only shift the waste around. You can only delay the problem. The money will leak out somewhere else because the system is still broken. The decision framework is still broken, and no amount of discipline fixes a broken framework. Here is the mistake. People think the question is, can I afford this? That is the wrong question. That question assumes the item is worth considering and the only issue is budget. But most things are not worth considering at all. Most opportunities are distractions. Most purchases are answers to questions you should not be asking. The right question is not, "Can I afford this?" The right question is, "Does this make everything else easier or unnecessary?" That is the first rule, and it changes everything. When you ask whether something makes everything else easier or unnecessary, you are not managing money anymore. You are managing complexity. You are managing focus. You are managing the structure of your life or your company. Money becomes a side effect. If something makes 10 other things unnecessary, it is almost always worth the cost. If something adds one more thing to manage, one more thing to maintain, one more thing to think about, it is almost always a waste, no matter how cheap it is. This is not obvious. It requires you to think in systems, not transactions. Most people think in transactions. They see an expense and evaluate it in isolation. Is this a good deal? Is this useful? Will I regret this? Those are transaction questions. They do not account for what that purchase does to everything else. They do not account for the hidden costs of ownership, maintenance, attention, and complexity. Chapter 2. Rule number 1 eliminates the noise. Now you need to understand the signal. Most people who grasp the first rule make an immediate mistake. They treat it like a filter. They start running every decision through the question, does this make everything else easier or unnecessary? And they think they have found the solution. They walk around asking themselves this question before every purchase, every commitment, every choice. This is progress. I am not dismissing it, but it is incomplete. Here is what happens. They buy the expensive coffee machine because it eliminates the daily coffee shop trip. They purchase the high-end laptop because it makes their work faster. They invest in the gym membership because it consolidates their fitness routine. Each decision, viewed in isolation, passes the test. 6 months later, they have spent more money than ever before. The coffee machine sits next to the French press they bought last year. The laptop joins 2 other devices they still use for specific tasks. The gym membership exists alongside the yoga studio subscription and the running app they pay for monthly. They made good decisions. They made expensive decisions. They made decisions that failed to compound. Here is the problem. Rule number 1 without rule number 2 becomes justification for accumulation. Let me be clear about what I mean by compound. I am not talking about financial returns. I am not talking about interest rates or investment strategies. I am talking about decisions that multiply the value of previous decisions rather than competing with them. When we cut Apple's product line from 70 to 4, we did not just eliminate products. We created a framework where every subsequent decision became simpler. The design team did not need to manage 70 different aesthetics. They refined one design language across 4 expressions. The engineering team did not spread their attention across dozens of platforms. They perfected 4. The marketing team did not fragment their message. They amplified it. Each decision made the next decision easier. That is compounding. Rule number 2 is about building this same architecture in your personal decisions. Rule number 2, every decision must feed the same system. You have a system whether you designed one or not. Most people do not design their system. They inherit it from their parents, absorb it from their culture, piece it together from advice columns and financial gurus, and that one friend who seems to have everything figured out. Then they wonder why their decisions do not align, why their life feels fragmented, why they work hard but gain no momentum. Your system is the underlying logic that governs your choices. It is not what you say you value. It is what your calendar, your bank statement, and your energy allocation reveal you value. Most people discover their actual system only by looking backward at the pattern of their choices. This is too late. Here is what I mean by feeding the same system. Every decision should reinforce a coherent direction rather than fragmenting your resources across competing priorities. I watched companies do this wrong for decades. They would have a strategy meeting and declare their priority, innovation. Then they would structure their budget to reward efficiency. They would announce their commitment to long-term growth while measuring managers on quarterly performance. They would claim to value their people while designing systems that burned them out. These were not bad people making bad decisions. These were people making decisions that fed different systems. The innovation decision fed one framework. The efficiency decision fed another. The two frameworks worked against each other, and the company wondered why it could not execute. You do this too. You decide health is your priority, then you structure your life to reward busyness. You claim you want financial freedom, then you make career choices that trade time for incremental salary increases. You say relationships matter most, then you allocate your best energy to everything else. These are not moral failures. These are architectural failures. When I ask people what their system is, they usually tell me their goals. I want to be healthy and financially secure and have good relationships and pursue meaningful work. These are not systems. These are outcomes. A system is the logic that connects your daily decisions to those outcomes. Here is a test. Look at the last 10 significant purchases you made, not the grocery store items or the utility bills, the discretionary choices where you had options. Write them down. Now ask yourself, do these purchases feed the same system or are they serving different masters? Most people discover they have 3 or 4 competing systems running simultaneously. A health system that requires expensive supplements and gym equipment. A productivity system that demands the latest technology and tools. A social system that burns money on maintaining appearances. A learning system that accumulates courses and books. Each system makes sense in isolation. Together they create chaos. The chaos is not visible in any single purchase. It emerges in the aggregate. You spend money on things that do not multiply each other's value. You invest in solutions that create new problems. You build a life that costs more to maintain than it produces in satisfaction. Rule number 2 forces a different approach. Design one system, then feed only that system. Let me give you a concrete example from outside Apple, because I do not want you thinking this only applies to corporations. I know someone, call him Michael, who spent years frustrated with his finances. He made good money. He was not reckless, but he could not build momentum. Every time he made progress, something would drain his savings. A car repair, a medical bill, a necessary upgrade to his living situation. When I looked at his decisions, I saw the problem immediately. He had no system. He had reactions. He bought a cheap car to save money, which meant constant repairs. He rented an inexpensive apartment far from work, which meant spending hours commuting and eating out because he was too tired to cook. He avoided the dentist to save on co-pays, which led to an expensive emergency procedure. Each decision made sense as an isolated attempt to spend less. Together they formed a system that guaranteed he would spend more. I asked him one question. What is the life you are trying to build? He did not have an answer. He had goals, save money, get healthier, maybe start a business someday, but no coherent vision of how his daily decisions connected to any of those outcomes. So we designed a system. Not a budget, not a savings plan, a system. His system became minimize friction in the things that matter, eliminate everything else. This sounds simple. The implementation was surgical. He moved closer to work, a more expensive apartment, but it eliminated commuting time, commuting costs, and the cascade of expensive convenience purchases that came from being exhausted. He sold the cheap car and bought a reliable used vehicle, higher upfront cost, but it eliminated the repair cycle and the constant anxiety about breakdowns. He invested in basic health maintenance, regular checkups, decent food, a simple exercise routine which eliminated the expensive emergency interventions. Then he cut everything that did not feed this system. The streaming services he barely watched. The hobby equipment for hobbies he did not actually pursue. The social obligations that drained his energy and his wallet. The good deals on things he did not need. Within a year, he was spending less than before and building savings for the first time in his adult life. Not because he had more discipline, not because he followed a budget, because every decision fed the same system, and that system was designed to reduce friction rather than manage it. This is what rule number 2 does. It transforms your decision-making from a series of isolated choices into a coherent architecture. Each decision reinforces the others. Your life becomes less expensive to maintain because you are not running multiple competing systems. You spend money on things that make your entire system more efficient rather than adding new complexity. But here is what most people miss. You cannot feed the same system if you do not know what your system is. So before you make another significant decision, answer this question. What is the underlying logic that should govern my choices? Not your goals, not your values, your system. The actual framework that connects daily decisions to the life you want to build. If you cannot articulate it in one clear sentence, you do not have a system. You have wishes, and wishes are expensive. Rule number 2 is not about restriction. It is about coherence. It is about making decisions that multiply each other's value instead of competing for your finite resources. It is about building momentum instead of managing chaos. Most people never do this. They spend their entire lives making reasonable decisions that do not add up to anything coherent. They wonder why they work so hard but gain no ground. The answer is architectural. They are building multiple structures simultaneously, and none of them ever get finished. You want to save money? Stop making decisions in isolation. Design a system. Feed only that system. Watch how quickly the chaos and the costs disappear. But you still need rule number 3. Because even with focus and coherence, most people sabotage themselves with one final mistake. Chapter 3. The third rule. Here is the mistake people make after they finally understand the first 2 rules. They think clarity is enough. They redesign their decision architecture. They ask the right questions. They build one coherent system instead of 4 competing ones. They eliminate complexity. They create focus. And then they destroy everything with a single word. Later. Not now. Later. I am not talking about procrastination. That is what people will assume I mean, and they will be wrong. Procrastination is a symptom. I am talking about something deeper, a structural flaw in how people think about time itself. Let me show you what I mean. You decide you need a better laptop because your current one wastes 2 hours a week in crashes and slowdowns. You run it through rule number 1. Does this make everything else easier or unnecessary? Yes. It eliminates technical friction, reduces frustration, saves time. You run it through rule number 2. Does it feed your system? Yes. You are building a system around focused creative work, and this purchase directly supports that system. Perfect decision architecture. And then you say, I will buy it next month, after I save up a bit more. You just broke everything. Because here is what happens in that month. Your computer crashes during a client presentation. You lose 3 hours of work to a corrupted file. You spend an evening troubleshooting instead of doing the project that would have earned you twice what the laptop costs. You make a mistake because you are frustrated with your tools, and that mistake costs you a relationship you spent 6 months building. The laptop would have cost you $200. That month of waiting cost you $8,000 in lost revenue, damaged reputation, and wasted time. But you will never see it that way. You will see that you saved $200 by waiting. You will see the discipline of delay as a virtue. You will have optimized for the wrong thing entirely. Rule number 3. Right decision, right time, or it is the wrong decision. This is not about impulsivity. This is not about justifying every purchase by claiming it is urgent. This is about understanding that timing is not separate from the decision. Timing is the decision. Most people treat timing as a secondary consideration. They think, first I decide what to do, then I decide when to do it. As if these are two different choices. They are not. A decision executed at the wrong time becomes a different decision with different consequences. The same action, 6 months apart, can be brilliant or catastrophic depending on the context it enters. Let me be clear about what this means in practice. When we returned to Apple in 1997, we did not just decide what to cut. We decided when to cut it. We did not phase things out gradually. We did not transition over 18 months. We cut 70% of the product line in 90 days. People thought we were reckless, but here is what they missed. Every day we delayed was a day we bled resources into products that were killing us. Every week we spent managing the transition was a week our best people remained confused about our direction. Every month we waited was a month our competitors gained ground while we were paralyzed by incoherence. The decision to focus was correct, but that decision had a time component built into it. Execute immediately, or the decision itself becomes wrong. This applies to everything. You decide you need to end a business partnership that is draining resources. Correct decision. But you wait 6 months to do it properly and find the right time. In those 6 months, you lose your 2 best employees who are tired of the dysfunction. You miss the acquisition offer that would have solved your cash flow problem, and you spend 60 hours in meetings trying to make an unworkable situation work. The decision was right. The timing made it wrong. You decide you need to move to a city with better opportunities in your field. Correct decision. But you wait 2 years to build up savings first and make sure it is the right move. In those 2 years, the industry shifts, the opportunities you were chasing disappear, and you are now moving into a market that has already moved past you. The decision was right. The timing made it wrong. Here is what people do not understand about money and time. They are not separate variables you optimize independently. They are part of the same system. When you delay a correct decision for financial reasons, you are not being prudent. You are paying a hidden cost that almost always exceeds what you think you are saving. I call it the friction tax. Every day you operate with the wrong tools, the wrong team, the wrong location, the wrong structure, you pay it. You pay it in wasted hours. You pay it in missed opportunities. You pay it in the slow erosion of your energy and focus. You pay it in the compound effect of small inefficiencies that multiply across every other decision you make. The friction tax is always more expensive than the thing you are delaying. Always. But you cannot see it because it does not show up on a spreadsheet. It shows up as the project that took 3 weeks instead of 3 days. The client you lost because you were too burned out to do your best work. The opportunity you missed because you were buried in problems that better infrastructure would have prevented. You see the $200 laptop purchase. You do not see the $40,000 annual friction tax you are paying by not having it. Let me tell you what this looked like at Apple. We needed to invest in a new operating system. Massive investment. Hundreds of millions of dollars. We were a company that had been weeks from bankruptcy. Every financial advisor would have said, wait, stabilize first, build up reserves, prove the turnaround is real, then make the big investment. We did the opposite. We bought Next for $429 million in 1997, when we were still fragile, when we were still proving ourselves, when conventional wisdom said to conserve resources. Why? Because every month we delayed was a month we shipped products built on a dying operating system. Every quarter we waited was a quarter our developers built on a platform we knew would be obsolete. Every year we postponed was a year we fell further behind Microsoft in the fundamental technology that would define the next decade. The decision to invest was correct, but that decision had a time component. Now. Not when it is comfortable, not when it is safe. Now, when the investment changes the trajectory of everything that follows. That is rule number 3. Right decision, wrong time, wrong decision. Here is how you know when timing is part of the decision. Ask yourself, is this problem costing me more each day I delay solving it? If the answer is yes, then delay is not prudence. Delay is the most expensive choice you can make. Your computer crashes twice a week. Each crash costs you 3 hours. That is 6 hours a week, 24 hours a month, 288 hours a year. At even a modest value of your time, you are paying thousands of dollars annually to avoid a one-time purchase. Your commute is 90 minutes each way. That is 3 hours daily, 15 hours weekly, 720 hours yearly. You are spending an entire month of your life every year in a car. What is that costing you in energy, focus, relationships, health, opportunities? Your business partner undermines every decision and creates constant friction. Every week you delay addressing it is a week your team operates in chaos. Your best people consider leaving, and your reputation in the market suffers from the inconsistency. These are not problems that get cheaper over time. They compound. And here is the part that makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes the right time is before you can afford it. I know how that sounds. It sounds like I am telling you to be financially irresponsible, to ignore your constraints, to spend money you do not have. I am not. I am telling you that afford is the wrong question. The right question is, what is this costing me not to have? If the friction tax exceeds the purchase price, you cannot afford not to buy it, even if you have to finance it, even if it strains your budget, even if it feels uncomfortable, because you are already paying more than it costs. You are just paying it in a currency you are not tracking. This is why rule number 3 only works if you have rules number 1 and number 2 in place. Without rule number 1, you cannot distinguish between a purchase that eliminates friction and one that just feels urgent. Without rule number 2, you cannot tell whether this decision feeds your system or fragments it further. But with those rules in place, rule number 3 becomes obvious. If it passes rule number 1 and rule number 2, then delay is almost always the wrong choice. Not sometimes. Almost always. Because if something genuinely makes everything else easier or unnecessary, and it genuinely feeds the one system you are building, then every day without it is a day you are operating suboptimally across everything you do. The math is brutal. You think you are saving money by waiting. You are hemorrhaging it through 1,000 invisible cuts. So here is what the 3 rules look like together. Rule number 1 tells you what decisions to make. Rule number 2 tells you which direction to point those decisions. Rule number 3 tells you when to execute them. What? Direction. When. That is your decision architecture, not budgets, not discipline, not sacrifice, architecture. And here is the part that changes everything. When you get the architecture right, money stops being a problem you manage and becomes a tool you deploy. You stop asking, can I afford this? You start asking, what is this costing me not to have, and how quickly can I deploy it? Completely different question. Completely different outcome. That is what I did at Apple. That is what saved us. Not better budgeting, not more discipline. Better architecture around the decisions that money would follow. And that is what I am telling you now. You want to save money? Stop managing money. Start building the architecture that makes the right decisions obvious and executes them at the right time. Everything else is just noise. Chapter 4. You want to know the hardest part. It is not learning the 3 rules. It is not understanding the framework. It is not even believing that this approach works. The hardest part is recognizing that you have been making the wrong decisions for so long that your entire life is now structured around compensating for them. Let me explain what I mean. When you make a decision that violates all 3 rules, something that adds complexity, feeds no coherent system, and arrives at the wrong time, you do not just waste money on that one thing. You build infrastructure around the mistake. You create workarounds. You develop coping mechanisms. You purchase additional products and services to manage the consequences of the original bad decision. And here is what makes it vicious. Each compensating decision feels rational in isolation. Each one seems like problem solving. This is the money trap nobody talks about. I watched Apple do this throughout the 1990s. The company made a series of decisions that violated the framework, then spent years building elaborate systems to manage the chaos those decisions created. The Copland Operating System Project, the licensing deals with clone manufacturers, the Newton platform running parallel to everything else. Each initiative spawned its own support structure. Engineering teams, marketing departments, supply chains, customer service protocols. And when people inside Apple looked at any single piece, they could justify it. They had reasons. They had logic. But step back far enough and you could see the truth. The company had built an expensive, sophisticated machine whose primary function was compensating for decisions that should never have been made. Most people are running the same kind of machine in their personal lives. You bought a car that made sense at the time, but it requires premium fuel, specialized maintenance, and a longer commute because you could not afford to live closer to work. So you compensate. You buy coffee on the road because you leave earlier. You pay for a gym membership near home because you are too tired to work out after the long drive. You subscribe to audiobooks and podcasts to make the commute bearable. You spend more on convenience food because cooking after that drive feels impossible. None of these decisions is crazy. Each one solves a real problem. But the problems only exist because of the original decision, the car, the location, the job, whatever it was. And now you are not just paying for that decision. You are paying for an entire ecosystem built to make that decision survivable. This is what I mean by infrastructure around mistakes. The financial advice industry will tell you to cut the coffee, cancel the gym membership, drop the audiobook subscription. They see line items. They see expenses that can be reduced. They do not see the architecture. Here is what happens when you follow that advice. You make your life slightly more miserable while leaving the fundamental problem untouched. You still have the long commute. You still have the exhaustion. You still have the mismatch between where you live and where you work. You have just removed the things that made it tolerable. So you suffer for a few months, then gradually add the compensations back and feel like you failed at discipline. You did not fail at discipline. You failed at diagnosis. The problem is not the coffee. The problem is that your life requires coffee to function. And until you redesign the life, cutting the coffee just makes the design failure more obvious. Let me show you how this works in practice. I know someone, call him David, who spent 3 years trying to save money by optimizing expenses. He tracked every purchase, he used coupons, he switched to cheaper brands. He refinanced his mortgage to a lower rate. He negotiated his cable bill. He saved maybe $300 a month through these efforts. And he was exhausted. Then he finally asked a different question. What decision am I compensating for? The answer came fast. He was living in a house that was too big, in a neighborhood that required a car for everything, 40 minutes from his office. He had bought it because that is what people do. You get married, you buy a house in the suburbs, you settle down. The house required constant maintenance he did not have time for, so he hired people. The yard needed care he did not want to do, so he paid for service. The distance meant 2 cars, both with insurance, both with maintenance, both with fuel. The isolation meant driving to see friends, driving to restaurants, driving to everything. He was spending thousands of dollars a month making that house work. But he loved the house, or thought he did. What he actually loved was the idea of what the house represented. When he was honest with himself, he spent most of his time in 2 rooms, resented the maintenance, and felt lonely in the neighborhood where everyone stayed inside. He sold it, moved to a smaller place 10 minutes from work, in a walkable neighborhood, sold 1 car, stopped paying for yard service, house cleaning, and half a dozen other services that existed only to maintain a house he barely used. His rent was higher than his mortgage had been. He saved $1,300 a month because he stopped paying for the infrastructure that compensated for a decision that had never aligned with his actual life. This is what the 3 rules do when you actually apply them. They do not just help you make better decisions going forward. They reveal the expensive scaffolding you have built around old decisions. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Does this make everything else easier or unnecessary? That house made everything harder. It required a support system. The new place eliminated the need for that system. Does this feed the same coherent direction? The house fed an idea of what his life should look like. The apartment feeds what his life actually is. Right decision, right time. He should have made this move 2 years earlier. Every month he delayed cost him at $800 plus the energy he spent managing complexity. Now here is the part that makes people uncomfortable. When you start seeing your life through this framework, you realize how much of your spending is not about the thing you are buying. It is about maintaining consistency with a previous decision you are not ready to question. You keep paying for the gym membership because admitting you will not use it means admitting you are not the person who goes to the gym. You keep the subscription service because canceling it feels like giving up on the hobby you told yourself you would pursue. You keep the expensive car because driving something modest feels like moving backward. The money is not buying the thing. The money is buying protection from the truth. And that is the most expensive purchase of all. I am not saying you should abandon everything and start over. I am saying you should look at your life and ask, what am I compensating for? What infrastructure have I built around decisions that no longer serve me if they ever did? Then ask the 3 questions about that infrastructure. Most of what you are spending money on right now is not creating value. It is managing the consequences of decisions that violated the framework. And you cannot save your way out of that. You cannot budget your way out of that. You cannot discipline your way out of that. You can only redesign your way out. This is why people who follow conventional financial advice often feel like they are working so hard for such small results. They are optimizing the compensation system. They are trying to run the mistake more efficiently. But the framework is not about efficiency. It is about coherence. When your decisions align with the 3 rules, you do not need most of the things you are buying. The complexity disappears. The compensations become unnecessary. The money you were spending to manage chaos becomes available for things that actually move you forward. This is not theory. This is pattern recognition from watching it happen over and over. The companies that break through do not do it by cutting costs. They do it by eliminating the need for those costs. They redesign around coherence, and the waste falls away naturally. The same applies to your life. So stop asking what you can cut. Start asking what you are compensating for. Find the decision that broke the framework. Then fix that. Everything else is just expensive distraction.